Hello, my name is Dan Land Pro, and welcome to another 100 videos in 100 days. And today's topic is disco. Don't forget to go over to youtube.com, Dan Land Pro or Webmaster Dan, subscribe and hit that like button. The reason I'm going over disco today is because disco played a very intricate role in the history of social dance in Chicago. And a lot of times when you hear that story, a lot of people leave the pieces out that actually go with disco and how disco and the music that disco was using changed the course of dance, or as far as the social elite in Chicago. Okay, let's go back to the 70s when disco first hit the scene. As you notice, a lot of people talk about stepping or bopping, like during the 70s everybody was stepping and bopping in Chicago, when that wasn't necessarily true. You had different cliques that did different things, whether you was in your neighborhood or whether you was at school, especially high school, especially on the low end where you had the car people, you had the players, you had the playettes, you had the fashion people, you had the boosters, you had the hustlers, the thugs, the gangs, the smart people, the jocks. You had different sets that did different things. Some people belonged to 2 or 3 different sets. But anyway, a lot of people danced during those early years, especially in the 70s, because you had sock hops and it was pretty much like a high school thing. I mean, the older people did the 2-step and they did the bop and things like that, but it wasn't as prevalent as people make it sound in our stories of today. When we reflecting on the bop back then, we reflecting as if everybody in the city bopped. In fact, it was rare that some jocks bopped or danced, and some people from other cliques actually danced. Some people was in 2 or 3 cliques. It depended on what your interest was. Just like a lot of people on the low end, most of them can skate and bop. Or sometimes you had people who chose to bop and people who chose to skate, people who chose to play sports, etc., etc. But anyway, the way disco ties in, the same way that what they was calling the new bop, you had James Brown and all them coming along with this real heavy beat. So that's pretty much what changed things, like man on man, high energy stepping, which I say was the early 70s and the mid 70s. You had that James Brown and that Motown kicking. You had that type of soul music hitting hard. R&B was hitting hard then, and people was dancing off of that. You also had like a couple of blue-eyed soul brothers coming on the scene with some nice music that people could dance to, and some of those classics people still listen to. But anyway, as far as past the mid 70s, a lot of us started going to the military. A lot of us started going to college. Some people went to jail. Some people was working at steel mills. Some people got married. We was going to different places. So people was pretty much leaving a lot of the areas in Chicago to do or pursue other things. You had a lot of opportunities coming around as a result of the civil rights of the 60s. So you had people taking advantage of a lot of those opportunities on all different platforms of life. As we know, music always have influenced the bop or the new bop. Music has always influenced the social dance community, especially African American social dance community, no matter where you are, but especially in Chicago. And the reason I say that is so when we tied into disco, what happened with disco, disco migrated pretty much from here, from New York. It was popular in France way back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, etc., etc. However, disco was popular in New York. When it finally did hit Chicago, you didn't really have disco songs back then. They was pretty much like the stepping culture. They borrowed disco sounds or disco music from other genres. So they borrowed a lot of African American music. So you had a lot of people that was bumping disco songs that was actually R&B songs or soul songs. When they did start finally making disco songs, it was probably around 76, 77. By 76, 77, that's pretty much what a lot of people understand to be a period when stepping or bopping had pretty much tapered off. And that's the reason, because a lot of people that was prevalent or really into that culture, they had left, or they had pursued other things. And then other things came on the scene. So you had a lot of popular people that migrated over to the disco scene. Most of the people who didn't take to disco stayed with stepping or stayed with bopping. And that's where people like Sam Chapman played an intricate role in keeping stepping or bopping on life support, because he was one of the few people that was really still bumping that type of vibe when you had so many other people, DJs, who had migrated over to the disco thing, because that was the popular thing. So if you really wanted to play at the major clubs, you had to do disco, because all over the city, people was doing disco. People was wearing disco clothes, disco music, etc., etc. So now you got people making actual disco music. So you had Donna Summers and those type of people making Love to Love You Baby and all this type of stuff. So you went to the club, you did your disco thing, and you networked and you hung out. So it really wasn't a lot of stepping or bopping going on in the major clubs. Now you still had little places or little pockets of places doing stepping, but I'm talking about the major clubs. They had pretty much nights where they might have designated that night for bopping or stepping, and it was usually on a slow night. So reality is that disco, just like most other things, influenced the culture because it played an intricate role on some of the changes that took place with the music and some of the changes that took place with the dance. Now, a lot of people think disco was followed by house. Disco wasn't followed by house in Chicago. Disco was followed by techno, that techno sound where you had the guys, I forget their name, it was a group of guys with the flower pots on their head, and this whole revolutionary culture and music was coming with this techno sound. And you had people in London and you had people in different countries, they was pumping that thing on a global tip. And that was pretty much pop in Chicago as far as the major clubs. As far as the African American social life, you still had disco and stepping running parallel. So now, when stepping or bopping kind of tapered off and you had this disco thing take place, they was coinciding with each other. Like I say, a lot of people kept stepping on life support in the late 70s. And that's where you're hearing a lot of stories from. If you notice, a lot of people that's telling the stories about bopping and stepping or the reflections that they're giving, these people are in their 60s. They might be 61, they might be 59, 58. They're not like 65, 66, 70, because that's the period is 70, 71, 72. We talking 66, 65. When you start talking to people that's 61, 60, they're talking about after stepping, restructured, revived itself. When it came back. So when it came back, even though it had to compete with techno and then later on house and different things like that, the bus stop and all these type of things, even though it came back, now you're getting into the contests and the instructors and the counts and the beats and all this stuff started coming on the scene, which was also influenced by the music. So that's a whole nother segment that we're gonna do. I just wanted to do a quick piece on the disco part so we will know that everybody in Chicago during the 70s was a stepping. That wasn't the end thing to do. It was a popular thing in the African-American community, but it was not the end thing to do in Chicago. The end thing to do was disco like everybody else. And that included a lot of African-Americans because the music, if you really go study disco, most of the music in the disco culture was African-American music, including James Brown and others, which had a great influence on the dance culture or the social culture in Chicago. Hey, my name is Dan Land Pro. I just like to bring it to you as best I can get it because a lot of times we twist it, we alter it, we twist it around, etc., etc. Now, I'm gonna start referencing things pretty soon because one of the problems I see is that when we get this information up, just like I'm talking about disco, I should be able to reference this information so you can go investigate and research this information for yourself. So whether I'm reflecting on a book or a video or some information that I got pertaining to the social life or the dance community, I should be able to reference that. So what I'm seeing is that not only on my platforms, but a lot of platforms, we don't reference anything except word of mouth. And we all know that word of mouth means that I could be referencing a lie. I could be referencing a distortion of history, which has been known to happen, especially in the dance community. So I just wanted to bring that to you on disco. You can go research it for yourself, read about it, see how the music influenced the dance, how the dance was influenced by the social elite, and how that impacted stepping or bopping during that period, especially the mid and following 70s. Hey, my name is Dan Land Pro. Don't forget youtube.com, Dan Land Pro, or Webmaster Dan. Till next time. Peace.